right. So the objectives for this section, which is section H on bladder and bowel, we're going to talk about the definitions. We're going to talk about the new items or changes to the LTCH CARE Data Set. We're going to talk about the intent of section H, and discussing coding instructions and needed information for items, and then we'll do some scenarios. So, HO350 is bladder continence, and you're going to complete it only if it's on admission or planned discharge, and it is a new item. HO400, which is bowel continence, currently exists in the LTCH CARE Data Set, and you're only going to we're only going to code it for admission. So the intent and rationale for section H is the intent is to gather information on urinary and bowel continence. The rationale being that bladder and bowel incontinence can increase risk for longer lengths of stay, lead to skin rashes, breakdown, and development and or worsening of pressure ulcers, can increase the risk for falls and injuries resulting from attempts to reach a toilet unassisted, can potentially be resolved or minimized by identifying and treating underlying potentially reversible conditions, and it can be socially embarrassing and lead to increased feelings of dependency and social isolation. So to start with definitions, continence is the ability to voluntarily release urine or stool in a commode, a toilet, or a bedpan. Incontinence, on the other side, is the involuntary passage of urine or stool. So steps for assessment for bladder continence for HO350, you're going to review the medical record. You're going to check for any kind of bladder incontinence, if there's records, specific records for your institution or flow sheets. You're going to look at the nursing assessments and progress notes, and the physician physical history and examination. You can also interview the patient, the family, and also talk to the other direct care staff. So this is a screenshot of this HO350, and you have 7 options here. And again, this applies to both the admission and the planned discharge assessments. You have code 0, which says that the person was always continent, so that throughout the 3-day assessment period, the patient has been continent of urine, no episodes of incontinence. Code 1 is stress incontinence only during the 3-day assessment period, so the patient had episodes of incontinence that were only associated with physical movement, activity, things like coughing, sneezing, laughing, lifting heavy objects, or exercise. Code 2 means incontinence less than daily, so that if during the 3-day assessment period the patient was incontinent either once or twice. Code 3 is incontinent daily, so if during the 3-day assessment period the patient was incontinent of urine at least once a day. Code 4 is always incontinent if during the 3-day assessment period the patient had no continent voids. Code 5 is no urine output. So if during the 3-day assessment period the patient had no urine output for the entire 3 days, and that could be due to lots of things, including renal failure, that they're on dialysis, they have no urine output. And then code 9, not applicable. So during this 3-day assessment period, the patient had an indwelling bladder catheter, a condom catheter, or ostomy for that entire 3-day period. So you can't assess that. The coding instructions for special populations. So for some of your patients, they might receive intermittent catheterization. And if that's the case, it's used to drain the bladder. Your code incontinence level is based on continence between those catheterizations. So our first coding scenario, Mr. A has multi-infarct dementia. He was incontinent of urine twice on day 1 of the 3-day assessment period, once on day 2, and once on day 3. So how would you code HO350? I hear you out there. Anybody have any numbers they'd like to share? I see a 3, I see another 3, some more 3s. I see lots of 3s. Okay. And you're correct. would be coded 3, incontinent daily. And that's because the patient had at least one episode of urinary incontinence every day over the 3-day assessment period. Mrs. T had one urinary incontinence episode during the 3-day assessment period. All other voids were continent because the certified nursing assistant followed a timed toileting schedule to assist Mrs. T to the toilet. How would you code H0350? I see some 2s, more 2s, more 2s, more 2s. Okay, you got it. 2, incontinent less than daily. And that's because the patient had one incontinent episode during those 3-day assessment period. Our third scenario, Mrs. W had an indwelling catheter that remained in place during the entire 3-day assessment period. There were no episodes of urinary incontinence. How would you code H0350? Got a 9, I got a 9, see a few more 9s. All right, excellent. It's not applicable because the patient was not incontinent because she had an indwelling catheter. H0400 for bowel continence. The steps for assessment, similar. You're going to review the medical record, bowel incontinence flow sheets, nursing assessments, progress notes, physician history, physical examination, talking to the patient or the family, or talking to other direct care staff. And again, this is an item that you're familiar with. It applies again only to the admission assessment. There are 5 coding options. Code 0 is if they're always continent of stool. If during the 3-day assessment period the patient had been continent for all bowel movements without any episodes of incontinence. Code 1, occasionally incontinent, if during the 3-day assessment period the patient was incontinent for bowel movements once. And this includes incontinence of any amount of stool at any time. Code 2, frequently incontinent, if during the 3-day assessment period the patient was incontinent for bowel movements at least twice, but also had at least one continent bowel movement. This includes incontinence of any stool at any time. Code 3 was always incontinent, if during the 3-day assessment period the patient was incontinent for all bowel movements. So therefore there had been no continent bowel movements. And code 9 was not rated, and if that's during the 3-day assessment period, the patient had an ostomy or another device, the patient did not have a bowel movement during the 3 days, and note that if patients do not have a bowel movement for 3 days, that's another issue that you need to evaluate. All right. Also, some other coding special populations, patients who require assistance to maintain passage of stool, some kind of artificial initiation, such as manual stimulation, rectal suppositories, or enemas, would be considered continent of bowel as long as the result of releasing stool was in a commode, a toilet, or a bedpan. So for our HO400 coding scenario, Mr. G has Parkinson's disease and finds it very difficult to get to the bathroom in time to move his bowels. Mr. G made it to the bathroom and defecated in the toilet one time during the 3-day assessment period. Otherwise, he was incontinent of stool multiple times on the other 2 days during the assessment period. How would you code HO400? I see some 2s. I see some more 2s. More 2s. And it is 2, frequently incontinent. The patient was incontinent of stool for multiple episodes, but had at least one continent bowel movement during the 3-day assessment period. So in summary, Section H gathers information on urinary and bowel incontinence. HO350, bowel continence, is a new item for the LTCH CARE Data Set version 3. If there's intermittent catheterization, code incontinence level based on continence between those catheterizations, and interviewing patient, family, or significant others regarding the patient's incontinence, and asking direct care staff who routinely work with the patient will be beneficial. And your action plan, when you go back to your organization, is practice coding some of the variety of scenarios with staff.